Hello everyone and welcome to Security Readings, the evidence-based cybersecurity research group security articles and book review channels for practitioners, scholars, and other interested and curious listeners. My name is David Maimon, and every week I review relevant and interesting scientific research which was published around different cybersecurity topics and which, in my mind, could be relevant to both cybersecurity practitioners and cybersecurity scholars. Our hope in reviewing these papers is to encourage thinking among professionals about a range of security-relevant topics and approaches, as well as guide decision-making processes regarding the implementation of cybersecurity tools and policies. This week, I will review Vector Guo Li and his colleagues' paper titled Reading the Tea Leaves, a Comparative Analysis of Threat Intelligence, which was published in 2019 and which focus on cyber threat intelligence and potential matrices which could be useful for assessing the effectiveness of a threat feed. I will dive deeper in explaining exactly what threat intelligence is in a few seconds, but before I do that, I would like to mention that this paper was published in Usenik's conference proceedings and is co-authored by Li, who at the time of writing the article was a PhD student in the computer science department in UC San Diego, along with other scholars from UC San Diego, Northeastern University, NYU, Georgia Tech, and the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. The reason I decided to review this paper this week is the heightened demand for up-to-date threat intelligence among security practitioners, yet the unclarity surrounding the different measures which could be employed for comparing different vendors' performances on this task. Since this paper is the most recent state-of-the-art piece in this context, I thought we should start with it. So before diving into the article and understanding the author's claim, let's make sure we're all on the same page regarding the important term cyber threat intelligence. A cyber threat, for those who are not familiar with the concept, is essentially any circumstance or event which has the potential to negatively impact organizational operations, assets, and individuals through an information system and via unauthorized access, destruction, disclosure, or modification of information. The individuals and groups posing threats are known as threat or malicious actors, and cybersecurity practitioners who are charged with the task of protecting their organization from these threat actors are constantly on the lookout for information about these actors and their modus operandi. So, threat intelligence is any information related to threat that might help an organization protect itself against a threat or detect the activities of the malicious actors. Now, major types of threat information that are available out there include, for example, IP addresses of suspected command and control servers, suspicious URLs that reference malicious content. There are threat intelligence feeds that offer information about tactics, techniques, and procedures that describe the behavior of malicious actors, and other security alerts regarding current vulnerabilities and exploit. Although each organization collects a certain amount of threat intelligence on its own, single entities have only limited footprint in cyberspace. Therefore, their ability to harvest up-to-date and multidimensional threat intelligence data is kind of narrow. And as a result, a thriving market for threat intelligence has evolved. This market is populated by third-party firms who employ a range of monitoring techniques to aggregate and filter quality information about current threats, and then offer this information for sale as a threat intelligence service for interested party. Unfortunately, though, there has been only a little empirical assessment of threat intelligence data, or even a consensus about what such evaluation should entail. As a result, consumer of threat intelligence products have limited means to compare services and product across vendors while factoring in different vendors and product cost. And that is what motivated Li and colleagues' work. What the authors of the paper we're reviewing today tried to do was to introduce a set of basic threat intelligence metrics describe a methodology for measuring them, and demonstrate the usefulness of their proposed metrics using 47 distinct threat intelligence sources that provide information about suspicious IP addresses, and another 8 distinct threat intelligence sources that provide information about malicious software files. So with that in mind, let's try and understand 4 of the 6 metrics proposed by these scholars. The first proposed metric is volume. Volume captures how much information the feed provides to the consumer. The author's assumption is that for an accurate feed, meaning a feed without false positive, which flags legitimate information as illegitimate, we would prefer a feed of greater volume to a feed of lesser volume. A second key relevant metric is accuracy. The accuracy of a feed is the proportion of indicators in the feed that are correctly included in it. In the end of the day, security teams would appreciate threat intelligence feeds which are low on false positive over feeds that are high on them. Finally, 2 additional metrics proposed by the authors are differential contribution and exclusive contribution. The exclusive contribution is the proportion of indicators unique to a feed. That is the proportion of indicators that occur in a specific feed but not in others. And the differential contribution matrix is defined as the number of indicators in one feed that are not reported in other feeds during the same measurement period. This metric may be important for some consumers who may want to know how many additional indicators a feed offers relative to one or more feeds that the consumer already has. So, to demonstrate the potential usefulness of their proposed metrics, the authors first took data from 47 distinct threat intelligence sources, such as Facebook Threat Exchange, public blacklist reputation feeds, and several other paid IP reputation feed aggregators, and analyzed the data provided by these services between December 1st, 2017 and July 20th of 2018. Now, the major issue with the data Li and colleagues obtained from these vendors was that different IP threat feeds assign different meanings and purposes to the data they collect. So, in effort to generate a meaningful comparison between the 47 feeds, Li and colleagues decided to group the feeds into 6 categories. Feeds providing intelligence on IPs that send port scans, feeds providing intelligence on IPs from which attempts to guess user and passwords were made, feeds providing intelligence on IP addresses known to distribute viruses and worms, feeds providing intelligence on IP addresses from which attempts to exploit vulnerabilities were made, feeds providing intelligence on IP addresses which are known to belong to botnets, and finally, feeds providing intelligence on IP addresses from which spam emails were sent. This categorization comes, though, with a caveat. Unfortunately, only few threat intelligence vendors explain the mechanism and methodology by which their data are collected. Moreover, a significant amount of data did not even have a clear definition of category and was only labeled as malicious or suspicious. The author had to go around this issue, but did not really disclose how. Instead, they moved to demonstrate how the list of metrics they propose could be useful in the context of this data. So, starting with a comparison of the volume alerts generated by the 47 feeds, Li and colleagues report that feeds vary dramatically in volume. Within every category they have looked at, large feeds contain thousands of reports with an average daily rate of more than 1,000 alerts per day, while smaller feeds generated significantly less annual and daily reports. For example, in the scan category, they observed over 425,000 unique IP addresses reported by Alien Vault IPs during that period of time, with a daily average of over 1,300 alerts per day. In contrast, close to 1,600 unique IP addresses were reported in PA Analyst feed during the same time period, with a daily average rate of 6 alerts. This was the case also for the other 5 categories they observed. So clearly, volume is a major differentiator between feeds. Moving to demonstrating the usefulness of the accuracy metric, Li and his co-authors admit that cybersecurity tool accuracy is a challenging concept to measure since there's really no known method that allows us to capture the overall universe of threats, what is known as the ground truth. So, thinking creatively, the authors have put together a whitelist of IP addresses which should not have been reported in the threat intelligence feeds. The whitelist they composed relied on data taken from three sources: IP addresses that are not meant to be reachable from the public internet, IPs associated with top Alexa domains, and IPs of major distribution legitimate networks. The scholar reported that among the 47 feeds assessed, 70% of the feeds contain IP addresses that were not meant to be reachable from the public internet, 44% of the feeds included IP addresses from top Alexa domains, and only few feeds contain IP addresses from a major distribution network which are known to be legitimate. Importantly, the author report that the rate of false positive in a feed is not strongly correlated with the volume of alerts reported by the feed. I have to say at this point that although this is an interesting observation, it is not backed up with any statistical test. Therefore, the conclusion here leaves something to be desired. Finally, and focusing on the contribution metrics, the authors report that the threat intelligence feeds which alert for botnet, exploit, malware, and spam-related IPs did not share much data between each other. Therefore, the feeds in these four categories have high exclusive contribution rates with each feed's unique contribution surpassing a median of 90%. In contrast, there's a higher rate of differential contribution rates in the scan and brute force categories, with up to 10% of similar alerts appearing in more than one scan and one brute force feeds. As a result, the exclusive contribution rate of these feeds is a little over 62%. To further demonstrate the usefulness of their proposed metrics, the authors have replicated their analysis in the context of threat intelligence feeds that are designed to provide indicators for malicious files. To do that, the authors compare the performances of 8 distinct sources of malware file threat feeds using the metrics they proposed. Their findings are similar to those reported for IP addresses threat feeds. Specifically, the malware files threat feeds varied in the volume of alerts they sent, and the overlap between the feeds was minimal. To assess accuracy of these feeds, Li and colleagues compared data generated by the 8 feeds with data obtained from antivirus companies. They found that the rate of false positives in these feeds was relatively low. So, what do these findings mean to security teams? Well, when debating between engagement with different threat intelligence vendors, a team needs to determine what is the reasonable amount of alerts that organization may be subjected to, as well as the reasonable amount of alerts that the team can handle and respond to. Note that there's no evidence suggesting that larger feeds provide more accurate intelligence than smaller feeds. Larger feeds only provide higher volume of alerts. In addition, the overlap between threat reports generated by each threat intelligence vendor is almost non-existent for some threats and minimal for other threats. Still, the findings reported by Li and his associates should be taken with a grain of salt, since the validity of the data used by the scholar is questionable. Indeed, the vagueness regarding the data collection efforts, as well as the questions surrounding the categorization done on the vendor's end, are significant enough to raise doubts in the author's conclusions. This is it for this episode. We would love to get your feedback and responses to this episode. Those could be posted on the EBCS Twitter and LinkedIn pages, or sent directly to our email address at ebcybersecurity@gsu.edu. I would like to thank Bianca Webb for editing this episode and posting it. I was David Maimon, and until next time, goodbye and be safe out there.